Okay, here's the answer key to the January 2015 Regents. Number one, this is pretty much straight law of cosines. You plug in, sketch it out, calculate, the answer is 1. Number two, the table of values below can be modeled by which equation? Well, you go through all your answer choices, you plug in, test it out. Turns out that absolute value of x plus 3 is the correct answer, as shown here. Number three, this is classic around the world. A to the y equals x. Number four, which expression is equivalent to the sum of the sequence 6, 12, 20, and 30? Well, this is sigma notation, and sigma is the Greek letter for sum. So what you do is you start with n equals 2, and you go up by 1 until you reach 5. So we have 2 squared plus 2 equals 6, 3 squared plus 3 equals 12, 4 squared plus 4 equals 20, and 5 squared plus 5 equals 30. Number 5, because this is exponential growth, 1 is the correct answer because the growth increases as t increases, right? The growth here for number 2 is the same. We've never seen this curve before. In option 3, it actually grows less and less each time. Number 6, which equation has real, rational, and unequal roots? Well, this is a discriminant question. You have to do the discriminant each time. B squared minus 4ac. We get 0, we get 9, we get 5, we get negative 16. Well, any negative number discriminant is imaginary, so it can't be that one. 5 is a non-perfect square, so this would be real, irrational, and unequal. 9 is a perfect square, and that's why this is the answer. It is rational. And any discriminant that equals 0 means you're going to have one solution, also known as equal roots. Number 7, which statement is true about the graphs of f and g shown here? Well, in order for a relation to be a function, it must pass the vertical line test. As you can see, f does pass the vertical line test. Remember, f is this piece and this piece. However, g does not pass the vertical line test because the vertical line would pass through 2 points there. Number 8. The common ratio of the sequence -1/2, 3/4, -9/8 is which of the following? Now, the common ratio comes from geometric sequences, which means you have to multiply -1/2 by the common ratio in order to get 3/4. Then multiply 3/4 by the same common ratio to get -9/8. So if we multiply to get the next term, we're going to divide the second term by the first term to find the common ratio. And at the same time, we can divide the third term by the second term to find the exact same common ratio. So that's what I did here. 3/4 divided by -1/2, well, we must keep change flip to get -3/2. And as you can see, when we divide -9/8 by 3/4, we get the same thing, -3/2. Number 9, how many different ways can teams of 4 members be formed from a class of 20? Well, here the order does not matter, so we're going to use NCR. 20 C4. So we go to our calculator, we type in 20, the first number, we go to math, this is probability, and we're choosing NCR, and 20 choose 4 is 4,845. Number 10. Now this is a double angle, so we look on the reference sheet and you replace sine A with 3/8, and the rest is pretty simple fraction math. You can also type this whole thing into your calculator and you end up with 23/32. Number 11, when factored completely, the expression. Now, this is factoring by grouping. So you extract the x squared, the negative 9, put the check marks there, and we end up with x plus 3x minus 3 times x minus 2. Number 12, negative 3 minus 2i is multiplied by its conjugate. The result is what? Well, the conjugate, if you remember, is the second term is negated, the sign is switched. So here we have minus, so we're going to multiply it by negative 3 plus 2i. We FOIL, the o and the I cancel out because they are a conjugate pair, and 9 plus 4 is 13. Number 13, a circle with center O and passing through the origin is graphed below. So here's the center, here's the origin. Guess what? Instead of using the distance formula, we can just connect the dots. Here's our radius. No, we cannot count the units because this is not perfectly horizontal or vertical. We need to create a right triangle, and we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. As you can see, the Pythagorean theorem gives me a radius of radical 20. Now, when we plug the center and the radius into our center radius formula or equation of a circle, we end up with x plus 4 squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 20 because the radical and the square cancel each other out. Number 14, the first thing I would do is distribute the negative power, and as you can see, 5 squared, a to the negative third, and b to the positive fourth. Any negative exponent must be reciprocated to the other side of the fraction bar, and then the power is made positive. So we have 25b to the fourth power over a cubed. Which trigonometric expression does not simplify to 1? As you can see, this is the Pythagorean identity. The original one, which is sine squared x plus cosine squared x equals 1, and then the other derived ones, where you have to divide by sine squared x or divide by cosine squared x. So these are the three identities you want to use. And as you can see, number 1, I end up with 1. Number 2 also gives me 1. Number 4 also gives me 1. But number 3 does not equal 1, so 3 is the answer. Number 16, what is the product of cube root of this times cube root of this? Now, product means multiplication. So what I've done is I've broken all these down to its prime factors. I've grouped them all together, and we're breaking out of jail using trios because this is cube root. As you can see, 1 is our result. Number 17, what is the product of the roots? Well, let's first put this quadratic equation into standard form, and the product of the roots is c over a. Remember, the sum of the roots is negative b over a. So we simply look at a, b, and c is negative 3, so we have negative 3/4. Number 18, how many different letter arrangements? 11 letter arrangements are possible using the letters in the word arrangement. So arrangement has 2 A's, 2 R's, 2 E's, and 2 N's. So this is the way we solve. We type in 11 factorial divided by, right? So the numerator is the original number of letters in the word. The denominator is composed of each of the repeated letters factorial times each other. So we have 2 A's, so it's 2 factorial. 2 R's, so it's 2 factorial. And the other 2's are there. So we end up with 11 factorial over 2 factorial times 2 factorial times 2 factorial times 2 factorial. In order to use factorial, we go to probability again, and here it is. It's an exclamation point. So there's 11 factorial divided by 2 factorial, and after plugging them all in the calculator, you end up with 2,494,800. Number 19, what is the third term in the expansion 2x minus 3 to the fifth power? Well, you want to use the binomial theorem, which is on the reference sheet. And once you follow the pattern, the third term, so once you expand this out, according to the binomial theorem, you end up with 5 choose 2, 2x cubed minus 3, negative 3 squared. You end up with 10 times 8x cubed times 9 equals 720x cubed. Number 20, angle theta is in standard position and negative 4, 0 is a point on the terminal side of theta. What is the value of secant theta? Well, you need to use the Pythagorean theorem. You plug in x, you plug in y to solve for r radius. You end up with 16 plus 0 equals r squared, r equals 4. Cosine of theta is the inverse of secant theta. So we have negative 4 over 4, right, because it's x over r, and x is negative 4, r is 4, so negative 4 over 4 is negative 1. Therefore, secant theta is the reciprocal of negative 1, and 1 over negative 1 is also negative 1. Number 21, the domain of f of x equals negative 3 over radical 2 minus x is the set of all real numbers. What you must remember is you cannot have 2 minus x equals 0 because it's in the denominator. And also 2 minus x is under the radical, so it must be positive. Putting these two conditions together, 2 minus x must be greater than 0. So you set up the inequality like this, 2 minus x is greater than 0, and now you solve for x. Minus 2 minus 2, negative x is greater than negative 2, divide both sides by negative 1, which reverses the inequality, and our answer is x is less than 2. Number 22. Here is a rational equation, which means you must multiply every numerator by the LCD. The LCD is x times x minus 3. So we multiply the numerator here, numerator here, numerator here. Cancels out the x minus 3 down here, cancels out the x over here. The key is to distribute the negative 2 over this binomial x minus 3. So we end up with 5x minus 2x plus 6 equals x squared minus 3x. Continue to solve, and you don't have to go all the way because look at the answer choices. This equation is a match, x squared minus 6x minus 6. Number 23, how many distinct triangles can be constructed if measure of angle A equals 30? This is the ambiguous case. Side A is radical 34 and side B is 12. So what we do is we use the law of sines to calculate what angle B is. And as you can see, when we plug all of our givens in and we take the inverse of sine of this expression, the calculator gives us an error domain. This means that this cannot produce a triangle, and the answer is no triangles. Number 24, the expression 3 halves x plus 1 times 3 halves x minus 1 minus 3 halves x minus 1 squared is equivalent to what? Well, there's a lot of FOIL going on here. We need to FOIL the first two terms, and then we FOIL the second term because it multiplies itself. After you FOIL this, you end up with 9/4 x squared minus 1. After you FOIL this, you end up with 9/4 x squared minus 3x plus 1. So I keep this intact in the original expression. This minus sign comes down to here. As you can see, 9/4 x squared minus 9/4 x squared cancels out. We're left with a negative 1 and a negative 1 over here because, look, the minus distributes. And we have negative 3x becomes positive 3x. So therefore, all we have left over is 3x minus 1, which is 3x minus 2. Here is an alternate method, method 2, which involves factoring the 3 halves x minus 1 out of each term. Number 25. So here's your frequency table. The interquartile range for this data is what? Well, if you remember, the interquartile range is basically Q3 minus Q1. It's a range not of the min and the max, but of the Q3 minus Q1, 12 minus 7 is 5. Now, how did we get this? I'll show you on the calculator. So what you do is you go under Stat, and usually it starts off with L1, but my calculator starts off with L2, which is just fine. And we enter in the numbers 5, 7, 8, 12, 14. There we go. And now I'm going to enter in the frequency, which is 9, 5, 8, 8, 8. Then you hit Stat again. Go over to Calc. One variable statistics. And the list is L1. And as you can see, here's L1. And the frequency is L2. Sorry, the stats were actually, the list was actually L2 because my calculator was wrong. And the frequency list is actually L3. Hit enter, hit calculate. And here we go. We have our minimum X value, our maximum X value. And here's Q3 and Q1, which is 12 and 7. And the interquartile range is 12 minus 7. Number 26 is your classic S equals theta R type of problem. Which distance to the nearest inch does the wheel travel when it rotates through an angle of 2 pi over 5 radians? So, S is what we're trying to find out. Theta is 2 pi over 5, and the radius is 18. We simply plug it in. We end up with about 23. Number 27. We have f of a plus 1, so we take a plus 1, we plug it in for x. As you can see, we need to FOIL. And then a plus 1 over here needs to distribute the negative, this minus. It becomes negative a minus 1 plus 1. Distribute the 4, and we have all this, and it simplifies to 4a squared plus 7a plus 4. And now we're ready for the short answer section. Number 28. Inverse variation is basically x times y equals x times y, or in this case we're using p's and q's, so it's p1 times q1 equals p2 times q2. We simply plug in 25 and 6 equals 30 q2. Divide both sides by 30, we get 5 for our answer. Number 29, this is dividing fractions. We need to keep, change, flip. As you can see, I factor out the negative 1 to get x squared minus 36. This is the difference of perfect squares, so we end up with x plus 6, x minus 6. X plus 6 squared is really x plus 6 times itself. I factored this trinomial to x plus 6 times x minus 3. And x minus 3 down here, that slashes with this. Cancel, 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 cancel. We're left with negative 1 times x minus 6, also known as 6 minus x. Number 30. Here we must take the ln of both sides, because we know that ln is the inverse operation of e. That cancels out ln and e. 4x comes down, and 4x equals ln of 12. We must divide both sides by 4. Being very careful that when you plug this in the calculator, you must close the parentheses before you divide by 4. So the answer is 0.62 because it says nearest hundredth, and hundredth means 2 decimal places. Number 31, determine to the nearest minute the degree measure of an angle of 5/11 pi radians. Now you must know that in order to convert radians to degrees, we multiply by 180 degrees over pi radians. So the pi and the pi cancels out. 5 times 180 degrees over 11. Plug in the calculator. We get this 81.81818182. Let's convert it to degrees, minutes, and seconds. So we hit answer, DMS. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 81 degrees 49 minutes. You must round appropriately. And remember, there's 30 seconds in a minute, so if the seconds is 30 or higher, you round up. If it's 29 or lower, you stay where the minutes was at. Number 32, the probability of actually being the catcher in a softball game is 2/5. Therefore, P, the probability, gets 2/5. Calculate the exact probability that she will be the catcher in exactly 5 of the next 6 games. So N is going to be 6, and R, which is the number of successes, is 5. So we have number of successes and number of trials. So we must memorize this formula. NCR, P to the R power times 1 minus P to the N minus R power. In other words, it's N choose R, the probability of success raised to the number of successes, times the probability of failures to the power of failures. So we end up basically with 6 choose 5, 2/5 to the 5th power, and since 1 minus 2/5 is 3/5, it's 3/5 to the 1st power because 6 minus 5 is 1. And we have some fancy fraction math, no big deal. We can use our calculator if we need to, and we end up with 576 over 15,625. That is the exact probability, so you must express your answer in fraction form. If you express it as a decimal, you'll probably lose a point. Number 33, here we have powers of I. 2xi times I minus 4i squared. You need to distribute. We know I squared is -1 and I cubed is -I. And once we clean this up, we end up with -2x plus 8xi. Number 34, this is the normal curve. And since we are trying to find out the mean, we know the mean happens right here on the top of the curve. 1 standard deviation below is 57, and 2 standard deviations above is 81. So basically we're trying to figure out how much these spaces are. What is 1 standard deviation? So it's 81 minus 57, and since it's 3 sections, it's divided by 3. And we find out that each standard deviation is about 8. So that means 57 plus 8 brings us back to the mean, which is 65. Number 35, the area of a parallelogram is 594, and the lengths of its sides are 32 and 46. Determine to the nearest tenth of a degree the measure of the acute angle of the parallelogram. So this is a triangle. Let's see, the measure of the acute angle. Yes. So we want to work backwards, right? We're going to use our triangle formula. 594 equals AB sine C. Now the reason why we got rid of this 1/2 is because we know that the full parallelogram is 594 area. So we're going to do that, and we multiply this part of the formula by 2, which cancels out the 1/2, which just gives us AB sine C. So we want to work backwards to find out what C is. And therefore we do 32 times 46 is 1472. Divide both sides by 1472. We get 594 over 1472 equals sine C. We need to take the inverse sine of both sides, arc sine, and we end up with about 23.8 degrees because it says rounded to the nearest tenth of a degree. Number 36, this is simply plug in the calculator, write an exponential regression equation for this set of data, rounding all values to the nearest 1,000. Remember, you have to use an equation. Y equals 733.646 times 0.786 to the x power. Using this equation, determine the amount of the substance that remained in 2002 to the nearest integer. Well, since 1990, we use 12. So we plug 12 in for x, and we plug it in the calculator, we get about 41. Okay? And this is basically a calculator feature. So again, we go to Stat, we go to Edit, and now we want to populate our list. So our first list will be 0, 2, 5, 9, 14, 17, 19. And our second list will be 750, 451, 219, 84, 25, 12, and 8. Double check all of our data, and it looks like I have entered it correctly. Okay, so now that we have this, we go to Stat, Calc, and since it says write an exponential regression, I'm going to go down to find exponential regression. Where are you? And there it is. Exponential regression is EXPREG. Hit enter. These are the lists, L2 and L3. And there we have it. It's A times B to the X. And there it was. I had to fix it because I had to delete the frequency. But as you can see, it's 733.646. As you can see here, it's rounded to the nearest thousandth, and the base is 0.786 to the x power. That's how I created this equation here, was off of this data, this equation here. Number 37, let's use a recursive sequence to express the next three terms as fraction reduced to lowest terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with A2, because they already gave us A1. And A2, A sub 2 is basically 3 times A sub n minus 1, so it's 2 minus 1, which is A sub 1 to the negative second power. And lucky for us, we know what A sub 1 is. It's 2. So 3 times 2 to the negative second power is 3 over 2 squared. That's 3/4. Now we're going to use 3/4 to help us with finding A sub 3, because A sub 3 uses the previous A sub 2 right here, so 3/4 goes in there. And 3/4 to the negative second power is really 4 squared over 3 squared, which is 3 times 16 over 9ths, which is 16/3. Finally, we're going to use 16/3 to calculate A sub 4, because A sub 4 uses A sub 3. And A sub 3 is 16/3. Therefore, 16/3 to the negative second power is 3 squared over 16 squared. 3 times 9 over 256 is 27 over 256. And those are the next three terms of this recursive sequence. Number 38. So we're looking at this cosine curve, and we want to identify A, B, and C, which are some of the coefficients of this equation. And we remember that the amplitude is A, B is the coefficient of x, and C out here, because there's no parentheses, this represents the vertical shift. So if we inspect this cosine curve, we notice that the center line would take place right here at 1, at x equals, or y equals 1, because 1, 2, 3 above reaches the top, and 1, 2, 3 below meets the very bottom. So this has been vertically shifted 1 unit. So I know that C equals 1. Now the amplitude, again, like we said, 1, 2, 3 to reach the very tip top, and 1, 2, 3 to reach the very bottom. So the amplitude is 3. A equals 3. Finally, let's find out what B is. Now, since we can tell that a full period takes place from here to here, right? The top of the roller coaster to the very, very bottom, back to the top, back to the very beginning. The period takes place in pi units, which means if we remember that our formula for period is 2 pi over b, then 2 pi over b equals pi. And now we just solve for b. Pi's cancel out, cross multiply, b equals 2. So there we have it. A is 3, B is 2, C is 1. Let me plug them all back in to write the equation, because there's many parts of this. You have to state what A, B, and C are, like I did here, and then you have to write an equation like I did here. Okay, last question of the test. This is the 6-pointer, and we're trying to increase the size of our rectangular deck. Right now it measures 14 by 22 feet, as I drew here. The building code allows for a deck to have a maximum area of 800 feet. So here's the bigger deck, it's 800 square feet. If the length and the width are increased by the same amount, we're going to add x to both 14 and 22. So our length is x plus 22, our width is x plus 14. Then we're going to go ahead and set up this equation, or this inequality, because it cannot exceed 800 square feet. So it's 800 will be the maximum. 800 is greater than or equal to x plus 22 times x plus 14, because remember, we're using length times width to set up this inequality here. So basically we FOIL, we solve, set it equal to 0 on one side, and we must solve using the quadratic formula because this is not factorable. So we identify our A, B, and C. A is 1, B is 36, C is negative 492. We plug in, and as you can see, our solution must be positive. The negative solutions are rejected, so I'm not even going to bother with the negative 36 minus radical 3,264 over 2. I'm only going to calculate the plus. So once I do this, I end up with 10.6 feet. Now, since they want our answer to the nearest whole feet, I cannot round up because that would exceed 800 square feet. I must round down to 10 feet. And ladies and gentlemen, there's your answer. This concludes the IA number 3, also known as Regents June 2015. Best of luck to you.